How can a Nazi ghetto be a model ghetto? We're about to find out. It all started with a pattern of deception. It didn't start with gas chambers disguised as showers. Let's start with a location, Theresienstadt, near Prague in Bohemia, now the Czech Republic. Slovakia was independent in those days. Consider this, that the Czech territories were a protectorate, close to and allied to the Reich, not directly occupied. Theresien was about an hour-and-a-half drive north of Prague, part of a fortress built by Emperor Joseph II between 1780 and 1790, named after his mother, Empress Maria Theresa. Constructed for protection against invading armies, though never used in this capacity. It consisted of two distinct sections, a small fortress used as a prison since the early 19th century, and a large fortress that became a garrison town named Theresien. The so-called protector of Bohemia and Moravia was none other than the notorious Reinhard Heydrich, soon to be a key player in Nazi negotiations with the Jews of the region. The first thing to understand is that in Czechoslovakia, Jews were very assimilated, yet they maintained great respect for Jewish tradition. In Prague, there were a great many synagogues, sometimes 6 or 7 per street. Children received a good Jewish education in German. They went to shul and then to the opera. And they didn't see any contradiction. In other words, they were highly assimilated, yet respecting tradition all the same. But in due time, the situation became the same for the Jews in the Protectorate as in Germany and Austria. In 1939, everybody knew what was going on in Germany and Austria. It was then and only then that Jews became Jews in every sense. The new reality was, of course, a shock, but they could cope with it. But for the children, new challenges arose because for the first time they actually began to worry about their identity. Bear in mind, there were no Jewish schools except for Jewish children who wanted to emigrate to Israel. And the only organized group was the Zionist group. At the helm of the Jewish community in Prague was a well-regarded gentleman named Jacob Edelstein. I encouraged the children to advance their education, especially since emigration was by this time impossible. Teachers moved from one apartment to another, holding classes during the morning hours. In the afternoon, the Zionist youth movement organized activities for the children, since no Jews were allowed to congregate in public parks by this time. For example, Jewish groups met in an old soccer field. Every afternoon, they went to the field. They played games and heard lectures. Many belonged to different parties. Shomer HaTzair, Dror, the religious Zionists. The object? To give Jewishness a positive connotation. If we had to wear the yellow star, let it shine. And that became the raison d'etre of the Jewish population. We discovered it's great to be Jewish. Among the Zionist leaders was Eglon Redish, nominated by Edelstein, who became responsible for all Jewish education. He was known for being very strict. And he gave us an important primary source from the Holocaust, since he wrote a diary that was later translated to English. Another particularly important leader came to Prague from the Sudetenland, Freddie Hirsch, a charismatic athlete who belonged to the Young Maccabees. I got involved straight away in afternoon activities. I insisted on cleanliness of body and clothing. The Madagascar plan had already been put forth by this time to evacuate Jews to other areas. The Lublin reservation had already been established, as was the Lodz ghetto. The Jewish leadership knew that the Nazis had evacuation in mind. So, in 1939 through early 1940, Edelstein started looking for a location, a ghetto, where Jews of the Protectorate could be sent without the Germans sending them to Poland. The important thing for us was to stay in Czechoslovakia. At the same time, Heydrich and his people were in discussion about the future of the Jews. In October 1941, a meeting was held in which they decided to send the Jews to a ghetto. Thus, Theresienstadt, a joint venture between the Jews and the Nazis, was born. Edelstein suggested it to the Nazis, who, for better or for worse, agreed. Edelstein said to them, "Everything you want to do in Poland, we can do here." So the Jews of Bohemia and Moravia wound up in Theresienstadt. The Jewish youth movement called HaChalutz declared that they must go first, being pioneers, which is what Chalutz means. They needed to prepare the place for the rest, especially elderly people, women, and children. Theresienstadt really was an exception to the rule on so many levels. In other places, HaChalutz did just the opposite of the wishes of the Jewish Council and its leadership, the Judenrat. Here, they cooperated and collaborated. In Poland, the Judenrat was always in conflict with the Germans. Here, just the opposite. In Theresienstadt, only one group, the communist-leaning Hashomer Hatzair, resisted, fleeing Slovakia and joining the underground. In Heydrich's eyes, Theresienstadt was to be presented as a transit ghetto, a way station for Jews, not to death camps, but to serve as an old age home, a convalescent home for Jews 65 and older, and wounded Jews, where they'd stay for the time being. In November 1941, the first group was sent to Theresienstadt. The place was dirty. Only the army had lived there. Now, Jewish civilians arrived and were shocked. The leaders, nonetheless, found ways to clean up the place. They even got some material from the Germans. In the meantime, the new arrivals were allowed to bring with them some 60 kilos of personal belongings. They hadn't been hungry yet, so they brought books, photo albums, musical instruments. Only the pessimists took food. They certainly didn't expect starvation. When they went to register, Freddie Hirsch arranged to have the young people assist the elderly. The children were enthusiastic. They actually wanted to help the Nazis carry out their plan, choosing to see everything in a positive light. There was no train station in Theresien. The people had to make a long walk from the nearest station through the snow, carrying their luggage. When they arrived, they were crowded into barracks. Males and females were separated. Children up to 14 stayed with their mothers. Boys from the age of 14 stayed with the men. There were communal kitchens, and of course, a Jewish council, here called an Altestenrat, that took care of assorted needs. But all of a sudden, the Jews found their situation precarious. In the summer of 1942, all non-Jews were evacuated. Freddie Hirsch wanted to continue his activities with the children, and he asked the Nazis for special homes and a school for the children. Amazingly, he started to open children's homes all over town. First for the Czech boys, then the girls, then German children. 15 homes in all, from nursery through high school. And they had the best possible teachers, painters, writers, university professors, teachers who volunteered to share what they knew. There were no textbooks, so everyone taught from memory. They even had a chance to perform classical music, performed by the elders who organized concerts. The children knew nothing about the genocide taking place elsewhere. They felt they were part of an autonomous community that, oddly enough, was flourishing. As for the Nazis, this was a good show for the outside world. They invited international agencies, the Red Cross in particular, come, have a look. In 1944, when the Red Cross was about to come, the Nazis decided to beautify the ghetto. But by now, the reality was that people were dying in the streets. When elderly people were brought into the ghetto, the lack of food grew even worse. The bodies of the dead were incinerated, their ashes placed in makeshift columbarium, pigeon roosts converted to ossuaries. The ashes were placed in boxes, bearing the name of each victim. But all of this was deception, geared toward putting on a good show. In the end, just before liberation of the ghetto, the surviving children were told to dump the ashes in the river. There's yet more to the story, as other prisoners were reduced to forced Freddie labor. For his part, wanted to separate the children from the ugliness of the ghetto, but he couldn't. The children, of course, went to see their parents, but couldn't be shielded from their suffering. In time, a new rule was adopted. Each child was to adopt an elderly person, read to them, take care of their needs. At first, the children didn't particularly care to do this, but when they saw how much these elderly people appreciated it, they had a change of heart. The time came, however, when the Nazis decided to send the Jews east. Some Jews were able to spare themselves due to their important positions in the ghetto. But when it came to deportation itself, in the notorious transports, they all went by families. By early 1944, most Danish Jews had already fled to neutral Sweden. But the Danish Jews who stayed behind were also sent to Theresienstadt. At the same time, in Birkenau, a special section was created to receive the Czech Jews, soon to be deported from Theresienstadt. Surprisingly enough, a special children's block was opened at Birkenau. And just as surprisingly, classes were again organized at Birkenau. There was even gymnastics. It was almost tolerable. But each prisoner was given an identifying mark, Freddie asked for SB6 for the children. I didn't know that SB6 stood for Sonderbehandlung nach 6 Monate. Special treatment, 6 months. Then, death. In the meantime, we organized a living library, people reciting literary stories from memory. All the while, the chimneys were going full blast, with children playing and listening to the stories. And believe it or not, they were reasonably happy. March 7th, 1944, an announcement was made. Everyone is to proceed to the quarantine camp. In reality, they were going to be gassed. Freddie was told about it by the underground and asked to lead a resistance, an uprising. Freddie wanted to know, what will happen to the children if we do this? The answer was obvious. It would lead to their death. And so Freddie said, no. If we have to go, we go together. There's a debate about what happened after that. Some speculate that he committed suicide. We'll never know. But in the middle of the night, the Nazis took everyone on trucks to crematorium number 3. A survivor recounted. The people resisted. The women and children were beaten, thrown into the gas chambers. I had to close the door. But inside, I heard people singing the Czech anthem, the communist anthem, and Hatikva, the hope, later to become the anthem of the State of Israel. Even in their last moments, they died with courage and pride. Of the 15,000 children who entered Theresienstadt, only 150 survived. The camp was dissolved in the summer of 1944. Holocaust scholar Yehuda Bauer notes, of the 139,654 Jews deported to Theresienstadt before April 1945, a scant 16,832 were freed when the ghetto was liberated after the end of the war on May 9th, 1945. It's one of the most melancholy yet heroic stories of the entire Holocaust era. It must not, it cannot be forgotten.